everybody. Welcome to another episode of the program. Today we're going to talk about early Egyptian queen revealed in 5,000-year-old hieroglyphs. And it's probably, the hieroglyphs are older, but they harken back to an even older time. And the queen that's been revealed was a regent queen. So she was, if you guys don't know what that means, that basically means she was like a placeholder until the next monarch would come of age and take over, which is exactly what happened. And what they found was these hieroglyphs in the Sinai Desert, which is very interesting. So let me pull up this picture. So as you can see, the Sinai Peninsula, again, very historically significant. It's been talked about in scripture and history. Menetho is he lived at that time of Ptolemaic Egypt, and he wrote down basically all the history of Egypt all the way until I think pre-dynastic Egypt, which I'll talk about in a second. But so they found these hieroglyphs in the Sinai Desert, and part of the reason why they think it's there is because they think that it served as like a marker that the queen or the monarch at the time, that was their land. So I did a video about Uruk and the time of ancient Mesopotamia, and they did a similar thing where they would have these pillars or something that marked their boundary, that this was a jurisdiction of their country or their land, their tribe, whatever. As I read the article, I thought I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into pre-dynastic Egypt. And here's a picture of the hieroglyph, by the way. This is just one of them. There's another set that I'll show you guys in a second. So just to give you guys a little bit context before we get into the meat of the article, 8,000 years ago, so about 6,000 BC, there were hunter-gatherers that got supplanted by these grain farmers. And again, we see this story. This has been a theme in my videos the past few episodes. And they were living in the Sahara, which at the time was green, and then desertification happened. The Sahara was no longer viable, so those people spread, and a contingent of them went to what's now Egypt, Upper and Lower Egypt. And those people, they created tribes, they worshiped their deities, and then that's roughly the period called pre-dynastic Egypt, and or dynasty 0. There were two leaders, I think Ka and Scorpion, and these two, I think the Scorpion is based off Scorpion King, that movie, or the movie Scorpion King's like based loosely on him, I think. It's a very this part of Egyptian history is shrouded in mystery, but they think that the first dynasty of Egypt united Upper and Lower Egypt, which was the Pharaoh Menes or Narmer. And the reason why they knew this was because historians talked about it. So Herodotus talked about it, and Menetho talked about it, who, again, they were a very respected and well-known historians at the time. The interesting thing about this discovery of this new queen is that her name never appeared in the Abydos Kings list, which is here. And according to the Abydos Kings list, the cartouches, right here, these are the cartouches, so each number represents each of the pharaohs or the kings that were in charge at the time. There's only 8 of them in the first dynasty. So this is very interesting, and it makes sense that she's a regent. Maybe the Abydos Kings list, maybe they're not, maybe they had different criteria of who was the pharaoh or not, and maybe to them a regent didn't mean much. But what is known is that the pharaoh was determined through the female line. So she is. It's not to say that she wasn't significant. She definitely was, but her regency didn't last very long. I think it was only about a year or so. So anyway, let's get into this. So this is like the hieroglyphs, and it's outlined in white just so you guys can see it. This doesn't look. It's not how they found it. But it's very clear that there are some symbols here that mean, obviously, that there was a queen, and that was her land. The Sinai Peninsula belonged to them at the time. And remember, if this is true, then she would have been the third pharaoh or leader of the first dynasty. So they found about 60 drawings and hieroglyphic inscriptions dating back to around 5,000 years. And then they discovered at this site called Wadi Ameyra, and it's in the Sinai Desert. So they were created by mining expeditions sent out by early Egyptian pharaohs. So at this time, they were already mining copper and I think turquoise and other minerals. And again, this is not that far out from this is only about 3,000 years after this migration from what was formerly known as the Green Sahara all the way to what's now Egypt. And they already had mining, and they had all these sophisticated, I guess, techniques to strengthen their society in a sense. They had these technologies, they had these methodologies, and it's very interesting that they were this sophisticated back then. And you can see all the influences from ancient Mesopotamia on them as well. I mentioned that earlier. So again, all this time in Egypt is shrouded in mystery, and there's always new and more information that comes out. And the Sinai Desert is huge, and it's a desert, so there's not that much discoveries going on, just because it's just the conditions are so harsh. So who knows what else is out there. Anyway, one inscription the researchers found tells of a queen named Neith-hotep. This is the queen that we were talking about. She ruled Egypt about 5,000 years ago and was a regent to the pharaoh Dire, I think that's how you say it, or Jir. I don't know how to say that, but he ruled for like 40 years or something. So very significant pharaoh for the time. The earliest carvings at the Wadi Ameyra site date back around 5,200 years. So that's about 3,200 years ago. So again, this is early kingdom. This predates the Old Kingdom, and this is very interesting stuff. That they didn't really know about this. They only knew about this peripherally, but this is pretty hard evidence that she definitely was the regent at the time. The most recent date to the reign of a pharaoh in these hieroglyphs go back to 4,800 years ago. So about a period of 400 years is accounted for that this hieroglyphs cover. So that's very interesting that they're very specific about that 400 years. Maybe there's other hieroglyphs that they haven't found that are related to these, and maybe we'll find them in the future. The inscriptions are probably a way to proclaim that the Egyptian state owned the area. Like this was what I mentioned before. The Mesopotamians did this as well, so that there's a connection there, among many other connections. And then these are the carvings without that white border that I was showing you. So you can see this could be easily overlooked if you're not looking carefully, especially if you're in the desert and it's hot and the sun. There's a lot of wild cards. There's a lot of variables going on. So I could see how it took forever for them to find this. It's because it could easily be missed. I could easily pass that. I can't even find my car keys in the morning sometimes, and they're like right on my desk. So I can only imagine how difficult it would be to not only find this, but make sense of it. And again, another thing is they depict a boat along with an assortment of animals. So that's interesting imagery as well. Like there's that Ark story comes to mind. The fact that they had boats and the Egyptians had boats, and I did a video on Egyptian boats, and so it pushed back the dates of shipbuilding and actual hard evidence of maritime civilization in Egypt. They would have mined turquoise and copper, like I said earlier. The route of expeditions changed, bypassing Wadi Ameyra, he said. And then at this time, the capital was in Memphis. So the capital moved a few times, but at this time it was in Memphis, and then Queen Neith-hotep stepped up as ruler 5,000 years ago. This is way before Hatshepsut, way before Cleopatra VII. She was probably the first female regent so far. There might have been others in the pre-dynastic time, but it seems like she was the first one. Egyptologists believe she was married to a pharaoh named Narmer. So Narmer is interesting because Narmer was the uniter of Upper and Lower Egypt. He's the first king, or the first pharaoh rather, of the first dynasty. So she might have been pretty old when she took over as regent. The inscriptions demonstrate that she was not the wife of Narmer, but a regent queen. So this is where all the the haziness comes in. So was she married to Narmer? Was that a mistranslation? If she was married to Narmer, then she must have been really old, and these inscriptions kind of contradict that. So it's up to you guys what you guys think. Again, I take all this with a grain of salt, guys. I'm not saying this just to because I believe everything that I'm reading, and I want you guys to believe it. I feel like I don't have to say that, but maybe I should say that every now and again. This is just what's out there, and these are just the discoveries that they're coming out. You guys can come to your own conclusions. I'm just trying to fill in some of the gaps and some of the context here if you guys aren't familiar with this. So they found an inscription that also covers Memphis, which was the ancient capital, and they think that's older than originally believed, because the ancient Greek and Roman writers claim that Memphis was constructed by King Menetho, who also doubles as Narmer, the first pharaoh of the first kingdom. But the inscription, again, is contradicting this. Memphis actually existed before Narmer was even born. So Memphis must have been a very, very central city, even in the pre-dynastic times again. And I have a feeling that pre-dynastic Egypt wasn't just a bunch of tribes and warlords and chaos. I think it was just one way of life that got supplanted somehow by this new dynasty. So all we have left are the information scraps of the victors. So again, just to keep that in mind when we go over this. We have in Wadi Ameyra an inscription giving for the first time the name of the city, the White Walls, and is associated to the name of Eri Hor, a king who ruled Egypt 2 generations before Narmer. So this guy, he was a pre-dynastic king, not a pharaoh, a king. So again, there's a few of these kings, pre-dynastic kings. I think there's like 6 or 7 or 8 of them. So this guy is being referred to in these inscriptions. So these inscriptions, whoever wrote them, had some sort of knowledge, whether they're bullshitting or not. I don't know why they would bullshit, but their inscriptions are in the Sinai Desert, in the middle of the desert, and I don't see any reason why this would be misinformation. We should just take this again. We should add this to the equation of everything that's on the table right now. The inscription shows that the ancient capital was around during the time of Eri Hor and could have been built even before he was pharaoh. So it could have been there could have been a long lines that held Memphis as the seat of their power, and that just got washed away or buried in the sands of time. And it would make sense if the pharaohs did take over from these pre-dynastic kings that they would want to obscure all that history and replace it with their own. Again, the victors write history. And then there's a section on archaic boats. The drawings discovered at Wadi Ameyra are several that show boats. On 3 of these boats, the archaeologists found a royal sarek, a pharaonic symbol that looks a bit like the facade of a palace. The sarek looks as if it were a cabin on the boats. So that kind of reminds me of an ark type of situation when you have like a boat and then there's a cabin there, and that you would put things like passengers, or in this case animals, in there. And again, we have this imagery of Noah's Ark and these like the story of the flood, essentially. Because again, why else would they have boats and boats with a cabin on there? And again, this is just what comes to my mind. It's conjecture. We're having fun with this. Boats were buried beside Egypt's pyramids, including Giza pyramids. That was always weird. The design of the boats are depicted at Wadi Ameyra, and the ones at Wadi Ameyra are archaic and much older than those beside the pyramids. So again, that must mean that there was some different epoch of rule going on. There was different ideas, because you would think that the younger boats buried next to the pyramids would somehow resemble a little bit the older style, because just geographically speaking, they're within the same region, but they weren't. So that must mean there was someone had either invented a different boat later on, or the ideas that were spawned during the previous age, the pre-dynastic age, those ideas were either lost or just completely replaced. And that includes stuff like engineering these boats. And again, this is all amazing just to be able to say that, because up until now, or up until pretty recently, they didn't think that when they found the boats, they didn't think anything of it. They just didn't add it to the equation. When I say they, I mean the Egyptologists of the time. They didn't consider that they were a maritime civilization. They just thought, oh, they're just boats here, and then that was it. So this is very interesting. This Wadi Ameyra site is very, very fascinating because it could potentially be a rich resource of information of pre-dynastic Egypt. So anyway, let me know what you guys think about this. Just an announcement, I'm going to be on Grimerica podcast on Wednesday at 4:30. I think they're going to live stream it. I'm going to see if I can record my part as well. And maybe I'll put that on my channel for you guys to watch. If you guys haven't heard of Grimerica, they're awesome. They're a great podcast. They cover not only this type of historical and archaeological discoveries, but they do all kinds of other, they go down all kinds of other rabbit holes that I haven't covered. So I think it'll be an interesting conversation. And again, let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys later.